Hello, this is Thad Goodman. I'm a director for the CSINext chapter. Welcome to the November meeting 2024. Before we get started today, just like to offer some information about an upcoming event, our Procrastination Day event, our second annual Procrastination Day event will happen Friday, December 13th. What a great day. So we're going to give everybody a chance to get some of those last minute credits that you might need. And we always enjoy having people come to the meetings. We're getting started a little late today. I apologize for that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and kick off the meeting just to keep things moving. Again, my name is Thad Goodman. I work for the National Gypsum Company. The topic today is Gypsum Board, Success in the Field. And this program was put together as an AIA event. Those of you that need it today will get one LU HSW. It is copyrighted, but we'll be happy to send out a copy of the presentation when we're done. Not to mention the fact that we are recording this session, so hopefully we'll get it posted to the website in the near future for anyone who you might have invited that misses it. Our learning objectives are basically to go over some of the things that happen on job sites from a gypsum perspective. We often get questions in our industry, all the different manufacturers do, and there are certain tools that we use to help solve those problems, as well as the fact of bringing people to consensus with different things that happen at the manufacturing level, all the way through application. So when this program was put together, it was to help address those situations with some of the common questions that we have. And we're going to use some of the governing bodies to basically show you objects that you can take to the job site to have an opportunity to make some resolutions. So today's presentation tools, we're going to use some of these industry documents that we talked about. We're going to use several reference standards that you may see in your specifications, you may have listed in your specifications, and we're going to offer some job site solutions. We'll start with the Gypsum Association itself. The Gypsum Association itself is made up of all the different gypsum manufacturers across the country. There are currently 7 in there. Through consolidation through the years, there was as many as 13 or 15 at one time. We've consolidated to the point where we're down to about 7. It's been around almost 100 years, so it's been here for quite a while. It's given the industry some solid guidance as things have changed through the process. So there's a series of documents that we'll discuss that are in addition to the reference standards you typically have in your specs that you can use. And we'll just start with them. As I go through, as a product rep, as I go through and watch the different reference standards that are used, from a perspective of an ASTM standard, ASTM C840 is traditionally the main one that's called out. And then the industry standards that are used are typically these 3. The GA600 is the Fire Resistance and Sound Control Design Manual. It's reproduced every 3 years, or should I say it's updated every 3 years. And so having the most current version will give you the largest breadth of information that's available today. The GA214, the levels of finish, recommended levels of finish. This particular picture is from 2015. The document today, the most recent document, is 2021, and it's basically just a Word document, but we leave this picture in there just to give a little context to this particular slide. And then the GA216, application and finishing of gypsum panel products, has been updated in 2024. So the header there says 2021, but there actually is a 2024 version that came out less than a month ago. So these are the 3 documents that we typically see as the standards. fire rated walls, sound control, levels of finish, how you finish the product aesthetically, make it look good for the owner. And then the 216 has all kinds of different application information that helps with means and methods. Just understanding gypsum in general, ASTM C1396 is the umbrella specification for whiteboard products. There was a time 15, 18 years ago where there were different ASTM standards, C631, C79, C36, that were individual for each product that were out there. ASTM kind of streamlined them at that time. ASTM C840, again, goes over environmental conditions, several different things, but it basically talks about overall application of gypsum board, how it should be used. Levels of finish, aesthetically, how are you going to make the product look at the end? Application of finishing for 216, the fire manual. There's a couple other programs out there, a couple other manufacturer-driven tools, and then there's another association called the Drywall Finishing Council. And so they've got a tremendous amount of information about how to finish the product and inspecting different types of panels, paper-faced as well as wallboard, standard wallboard. And then the two major manufacturers, USG has a handbook, National Gypsum has a construction guide. These are kind of the go-to instruction manual that are out there. So there's a variety of different things that you can use to work through the system when you've got a product on the job. Here's some of the standards. This thing out of my way. Here's some of the standards and the reference material, kind of the where to go. Drywall Finishing Council, dwfc.org, gypsum.org, astm.org. So when you're looking for resources, these are some of the places that you could start. So we've got the job bid, we've got the procurement document signed, we've mobilized forces, we've got the building has started. And so we're going to start to go through the process of putting Division 9 products on the job. This happens for all the different divisions, but we're going to focus today on Division 9 because that's the world that we live in from a gypsum perspective. So from an architectural standpoint, the architect has some responsibilities. They have some duties. One is to communicate design intent. If you've got a wood frame building, that's a big intent. If you've got, brick on the outside, that's a big intent. So we start to think about, okay, as we put our documents together, are we using reference standards? Are we using, what's the different way that we communicate from a specification standpoint? What are the products that we're using on the job? Are they sustainable products? Are they harsh water product, protective products? What's the job control? What's the job overall? What does the owner need? So the architect does a really good job of putting together a set of plans and drawings that work hand in hand. You've got your specifications, you got your drawings. They work in tandem to create a picture with an instruction manual of what we want to get done. Inside the specifications and inside these documents, it's up to the architect to make sure that they're specifying industry resources that are appropriate to the project themselves. And I always recommend that they specify the most current industry resources, because as things grow, as things change, as the industry moves forward, these are places where it's always good to have the best. It's always good to have the most current. There's things that change in the industry when we want to make sure that we're addressing them. For example, industry standards from the 1980s would change dramatically when we started to see the intrusion of mold on the interior buildings. So as we think about that, we wouldn't want to specify a reference standard from the 60s that wouldn't even mention the word mold, different things like that. The architect also has a responsibility to make sure that things are going well, depending on how they've set up the contract. But traditionally, there's field visits. So the architect comes out to make sure that the plans that they put in place are being put together correctly. If there's questions out there, they're the resource to answer them. And so it's important for them to be present. Sometimes it's a regular site visit once a week. Sometimes it's just key points in the organization and the construction of the building. And so it's their responsibility to support the site visits in a fair and truthful manner to make sure that they're doing their job correctly and the things that they've communicated are implemented correctly. The manufacturing part, there's products that come to the job site that had to be assembled somewhere. They had to be manufactured. There's products that are going to go on the job that are going to be an integral part of the process, and they want to make sure that they're taken care of. So it's up to the manufacturer to understand design intent. For example, as a rep, there are times that I talk to architects on a regular basis who say, can I use this product in this application for this intent? And it's up to us to make sure that we're giving good advice. And one of the ways that we do that is we make sure that we check, or often manufacturers are involved in manufacturing current industry resources. We have people in our particular company that are on the Drywall Finishing Council, that are ASTM committees, that are on the GAs, that are in Gypsum Association document committee, like the GA 600, the 216 that we talked about. These things are being updated by a consortium of task teams of people, committees of people that are well aware of what happens on the industry, and we make changes as the industry changes. Oftentimes, we're asked to go out and do field visits, and it's up to us to be prepared when we go and to be aware of what happens when we're there and to understand the design intent and to support the site in a truthful and fair manner. And then the contractor, as we start talking about this particular relationship, the circle of this relationship, it's up to the contractor to understand and comply with design intent. And there are times where they say, okay, here's the design intent and here's a system that was been used. We may want to make some changes to add value of one way or another, whether it's reducing cost or adding life to the building. We want to make some changes. It's important to them to communicate and do all that with the best intentions. They should be aware of the current industry resources and what happens. And then it's up to them to make sure that they have clear, clean, acceptable working conditions. They need to make sure that their inspections are complete before the next trade takes over, and make sure that the previous trade's work is correct and complete before they move forward to the best of their ability. And so their job is to support the site visits. If anybody comes to visit from a manufacturer or an architectural standpoint or an owner standpoint, in a fair and truthful manner. So let's start with getting to the site itself. There are some do's and don'ts. If you're going to go out and visit a job site, there are some do's and don'ts. PPE is important. Prepare and protect. Make sure that you've got all of the stuff that you're supposed to have, your safety vest and your safety glasses and your hard hat and if they require, steel-toed shoes. Come to the job site prepared. Don't put your construction manager or your GC in a position where they have to worry about you being safe out on the job. And then it's important to check in. I recently went to a job to do an inspection, and the first thing that I did was I went to the job trailer. And the superintendent actually said, he goes, we've got an open site here. People wander in and out all the time. I really appreciate you coming here just to check in. Makes a big difference. It makes my job so much easier. And then once you're on the job site, we have a form that we carry, and hopefully your firm does too. When you go out to the job site, there are some things that you need to document. What's the temperature for that day? What's going on the job? Is there a buck hoist that's not working correctly? Walk up and down the stairs, whatever. So it's important to go without any kind of time pressure. Because if you're on a job site, there's things that happen on a job site where sometimes you have to wait. They're unloading a truck. There's materials that are on the buck hoist that you have to wait for to get up to the top floor, whatever. So if you're in a big hurry, it's going to create frustration for you and the people around you. So, goes in, do your best to be there and understand that these things take time. You're a guest on the job site. You're not in the normal flow of the action, and you need to be prepared to wait sometimes. If you're there to look at a product, if you're there to inspect something that someone has a feeling about might not be correct, take a picture, get some samples. What was the date it was manufactured? What was the date it was issued? What's a code on the back of the product itself, or is there a sticker somewhere? We'll talk about that in a second, but gathering all the information makes a lot of sense. For example, in the picture down to the right here, you can see that there's all kinds of water laying on this particular area. Maybe they had some sort of rain that day or day before, and if you're there to look at some wet drywall, was it appropriately covered? Is the building covered in? Is it before or after the site? So when you're talking about any kind of a problem, let's get the contractor expectations. Is it a situation where they need to move forward and the job is being held up? Is it a situation where there's a product that's in place that needs to be replaced? Is there a dollar cost that might be involved with what's going on? If so, what's the time frame? What are the expectations of who will pay for it and what it will cost? The more things we can do on the job site, the earlier possible, the better off we are. So when you leave and the contractor walks away, or the GC or the architect, whoever's in that meeting together, you all have a mutual understanding of what the next steps are. The job that I recently talked about that I was on, there was some product there that was being affected by another product manufacturer that was underneath this one. And so having the information before I went, I had called this other manufacturer and said, your product is involved. Can you be there as well? So we had a conversation about, okay, here's an application. Some of it was application issue. Some of it was a framing issue. Some of it was a product issue. And so when we left, we said, okay, here's 3 things that need to happen. Here's the 3 people that are involved. And here's how we understand how long it'll take to get that done. And then here's a cost estimate of where we think we're going to be. External factors, something as simple as, okay, can we get the stuff back down the buck hoist, and what time do we have available to have this happen because it's on a higher floor? So understand the entire scope of the process. And like I said, check the job site conditions. I mentioned already the water situation. Maybe there was no power and there's a situation where something froze this time of year. Where I live, it's getting to the point where we're starting to see some white stuff on the ground. Understand that there are things that go wrong. It's going to happen. Maybe not to the extent that we've seen here in these pictures, okay? But there's things that are going to go wrong. So when we think about, okay, how do we want to fix this? If you look at that picture to the right, that might be something as simple as we just need to cut a door in. It might be something as complicated as the fact that that stairway should have come out the other side of the landing, and that's a bigger issue. But get the right people in the room, communicate the correct problem, and make sure that they understand, okay, here's the problem, here's what we'd like to do to fix it, here's the expectations that we have. It's important to have that industry documentation that I talked about earlier. If you go with the right stuff and you have something in your hand to control the situation, if somebody starts to get frustrated with what's happening, you've got the support of the manufacturer of the products that you're talking about. Or if there's an SOP, a standard operating procedure that somebody's violating, that should be a written document somewhere. That should be at the job site as well. And then, of course, it's important to always be safe. Obviously, you look at the picture on the left-hand side, that's staged just to have some fun. But if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, there was a problem there where somebody didn't adequately prepare for what they were trying to move with that earth mover, with that crane, and there was a problem, and hopefully nobody got hurt there. And that's the thought process. You hope everybody goes home with the same number of appendages they came with. That's the whole thought. That's the whole theory. And then if there's a problem on the job site, one of the major things that we understand about a job site is that time is of the essence. Once we start to put this program together, the quicker we can get that building built safely and correctly, the quicker it can be used for its intended use. But the first theory of holes is once you're in a hole, the most important thing you can do is stop digging. I had a situation several years ago where there were some obvious imperfections. There were some cockles, some watermarks on the face of some drywall. And there was an inexperienced crew there, and they continued to hang this product that had been delivered to the job to the tune of about 600 sheets in like 14 different apartments. When the owner finally started to paint, the owner called and was upset about what happened. And when we came to review the situation, they had used some labor that was inexperienced. They weren't industry professionals, and they had just continued to move forward, even though it was obvious the product was not in good shape. So during the negotiation process, we went to the, we admitted that we had a problem, and we went to them and said, here's what we're willing to pay. And they were disappointed that it didn't cover a couple other things, like the time it was going to take things down, or the time it was going to take to skim every single unit. And they also wanted some information. They also wanted some help with some of the lost revenue they would have, because as we get to the drywall part, we're to the point where we're getting closer to the end of the job, and now this was going to delay them opening up these apartments for rent. We decided not to go down that road completely, and one of the things that I brought to their attention was, if you'd have had the correct people on the job, this would have happened before they hung the second sheet. The fact that they hung that many sheets and took that long until you started to paint it, and they had also waited till the very end to start painting anything, which was a whole different issue. If they'd have started with the first 100-foot in place with starting to apply the paint, they'd have seen it immediately and it would have been a lot easier. So again, the whole thought process is we all need to work together. We need to go with the correct intent. As we said earlier, the duties of the manufacturer is, do we have a problem? And did the contractor do the right thing? Because they have a duty to report things as soon as it happens. We had some documentation, some written documentation about what the procedure should have been and kind of the time frame, and we worked it out. We all came to an appointment that we agreed to, but took much longer than we thought that it would. Earlier in the conversation, I talked about getting on the job site, and when you find something that's wrong, in this particular case with the cockles that we had, there was somebody that manufactured that board. There was a crew on a certain day at a certain plant. And so the Gypsum Association has a document, the GA 1000. It was updated last in 2017. Things don't change much from plants and codes, so we don't need to update it very often. But it's important to understand how you identify just what happened. And so if you look at the top picture there, you can see 23 is a plant number from a competitor that I have. 41318, 1921 is a military time. Here's another one. Here's a plant number. Here's a time. Here's a military time. There's a manufacturing code. Here's another one. Gypsum Board R3501. That's a specific manufacturer. Issue number 3853. That's a specific plant. Here's a type of drywall. So as we start to think about how we communicate back to the manufacturer if we have a potential problem. And again, these are things you hope never happens, but if they do, you want to be able to communicate clearly and correctly. When I went out to look at the one job with the cockles that we talked about, I knew what I was going to see beforehand. They had described it on the job site, so I had a pretty good idea. They had given me a run code. I went back to the plant and I said, okay, what was going on at this time? And they said, yeah, we had some water on the line. We thought we had it all contained. Hopefully we didn't let a truck or two get out. We're not sure. And so I pretty much knew what I would find when I got there. So I was prepared. And that's the whole thought process. Go to the job site prepared and be ready to go. Just putting product on the job has its own way of doing things, The Gypsum Association has a document, 801. It was last updated in 2023. Handling and storage of gypsum panels. Most manufacturers have the same sort of thing. Today we're focused on gypsum, so that's the world I live in. But what we're talking about here, you could probably find for about any manufacturer. So from a gypsum board perspective, for you to have success on your job, it makes sure that they get it to the job site correctly, they store it correctly, and it's handled correctly. In this particular case, they didn't have many long walls anywhere. The walls that were in this particular area were the short walls from the view where this picture was taken. There were several different doorways. You wouldn't want to lay that kind of weight out lean it against a window to the outside. That's structurally not safe. So they were laying it down in the middle of the floor in the various rooms that they needed to give the gypsum people a chance to hang in those areas. Sometimes just getting it into an area where you can get it in the building takes a crane or a forklift or a boom truck. There's several different ways that this happens. So when we get the product on the job, we want to make sure that it's upright if it needs to be upright, or it's laid down if it needs to be laid down. And that 801 document will give you some guidance either way. Sometimes just getting it to the job can be an issue. And in this particular picture, what you're seeing there is a 73-foot A-frame rail car. This is product that probably came from the West Coast, maybe out to the East Coast, or maybe even from the East Coast out to the West Coast, because different manufacturers, they manufacture different products in different places. We don't make every single piece of drywall, the 42 different types that we make, not every single one is made at every plant. There are certain plants that have laminating equipment or wider lines or faster lines or different raw materials in different parts of the country that make sense to manufacture one spot and then move them over to the other. Because this is an open framed car, and again, 73-foot A-frame, it's the product leans in a little bit. They put airbags in it to protect it, but they're also protecting it from the environment as they move it around. And so there is some liability when this is for transportation only. There are some transportation issues where you get it there safely, you get it there in good shape, and then these bags should be opened up immediately to stop the growth of mold. You don't want them to be encased in there in a humid climate very well. I had a situation with a job in Oklahoma where they stored this product outside. It was during an allocation time. They didn't have a lot of interior room. They were trying to stuff the barn full, so they had plenty of supply for their contractors. And the board sat out like this for almost a year. And when they went to open it up, it had all kinds of mold. Some of the sheets were actually black, where they'd had a couple little pinholes in it. And so understand the process of how you bring the product to the job. That GA 801 talks about transportation, bagging, transportation, that sort of thing. Water damage. There's different types of gypsum board, but the most common type, the type you see in your home, is a paper face product that has starches and sugars in it. And there are times where it will get wet. And so if it does get wet, we need to assess what kind of damage is done and how it's been done. This is a common issue that we have. The GA 23119, 19 is the last year it was updated, talks about assessing water damage to gypsum board. And it actually goes over the fact that there are moisture meters of varying types. If you think about drywall in general, drywall has chemical water in it. CaSO4 2H2O, calcium sulfate dihydrate. So there are people who will take a wood moisture meter and stick it into a piece of drywall and say, oh, nope, this is an unacceptable level of drywall moisture. Well, that's not really the case. If there was no moisture in that board, it would be powder and it would fall apart. So this document is a really good one if you had those situations where you were having some questions. It gives some general guidance as well as it gives some moisture meter direction. When we go out on the job site, sometimes we almost have to be detectives. You know, this particular picture is a good one. I got a phone call from somebody who said, your drywall is damaged and we need to have you come out and replace it. I said, okay, can you tell me a little bit about it? Well, it's all scuffed up and it really looks bad. Okay, I'll come out. So I come out and I see this particular picture. Now, this was stacked on a trailer on the job site. So what the picture you're looking at is about eye level for me. It was over 4 foot tall. You can see at the very bottom there, you can see the metal railing. But it just didn't look right. And so I asked the fella, okay, the product came in on a truck. You stored it here. You stored it on this external storage area to keep it off the ground, which is perfect. You should have done that. You've got the lifts in between it. You know, when we talk about lifts, there's different bunks of drywall, a stack of 24 to 34, depending on the type. And then you've got risers in between, pieces of drywall or wood or something that keeps them from, gives you an opportunity to put the forklifts in there and pick them up. But I said, it didn't show up like this on a truck. And they said, well, I finally found the right person on the job site. He was a forklift operator. He says, hey, we had a couple of lifts laying on the ground. We pulled it off the truck and I scraped across it. And if you just look here, you can almost see a circular motion with the way this is put together. He had run into it with a forklift. All right. While I understand that they might need to have this product replaced, that's not at the expense of the gypsum company or the delivery company. That was a job site issue. So again, make sure that as we start to talk about supporting each of these job sites in a fair and truthful manner, we need to all be on the same page with having the right information. Gypsum board, as I talked about earlier, is either a glass mat faced or a paper faced product. It has some limitations with the way it can be painted and the way it can be used. You wouldn't want to put a paper faced product in a bathroom underneath a ceramic tile. And in this particular case, we talk about the GA214, which is the levels of finish document that talks about how to protect critical light areas. And here's a good example. This was a 12-story building in Chicago. It was faced east to west. It was a nursing home application. And they went through and hung all the drywall and they painted it basically all at once. And what they had happened was they had specified a level 4, which means that there's no drywall joint compound that needs to be put anywhere except where the nail spots are and the flat seams are. And then they had a semi-gloss paint that they put over top of it. And when the owner came in the next day, this was about 9 o'clock in the morning, this is what he saw in the main living room, and he was very unhappy. Now, this was in all of the floors on one side of the building in the morning, and then in the evening it would be on all the floors in the other side. Once the light went through, you could see that this particular piece was fine. It looked just fine once we got out of the critical light area. This should have been skimmed with a level 5. In other words, a monolithic coat of drywall over the entire surface would have solved this problem. So understanding that every product has limitations, every product has uses where it should be used and where you can extend it past the life of what the product should be doing or the effectiveness of what the product should be doing. In this particular case, should have been a level 5. If they'd have started with 1 or 2 units, they'd have found that out early. As it turns out, it was a much bigger issue because the entire building was painted all at once. Here's a couple other areas. If you look at this particular picture, you can see that there's probably not even a storefront. There's a skylight right here. There's light pouring down on this wall. It had been primed, and the owner came in and said, this board looks unrough. I think it has ripples in it. I don't think it's manufactured correctly. And basically all it was it needed to be a level 5 because you could see the seams in between. So in this particular case, the superintendent, the owner's rep, the architect, and the painter and the drywall person was there. And I said, would you all just put your hands on the wall, close your eyes, and run your hand until you feel the ripple or the hump that the owner is concerned about, and then we'll see how we do. And in 4 of the 5 people that were there, they were out in the field of the board, which means they were in the middle of the board that had no joints on it or anything. And then they understood that that's more of a visual perspective than the other. And then here on the other side, this was going to be a flat ceiling that was they had not originally specified level 5 on this. I happen to be on this site for a different reason, and we had a conversation about the fact that they should make sure that they've painted that. They should either texture that ceiling, which they didn't want to do, or they should make it a level 5 because there was going to be light washing down that wall every morning and it was going to be seen. So realize that gypsum board should be, it says here must be, we think it must be, but it should always be primed. You need to have some sort of a monolithic coat over top of it from a paint perspective to be able to start to make it a more monolithic surface before you put a flat product on there, before you put anything on there with a semi-gloss or a gloss. There was a time when I was growing up where they would prime and then they would put 2 coats on. In today's society, there are places where they have gone to the point where they've made some changes in the paint, they've made some changes in the way that the application goes on. I was at a job the other day where the painter was painting it with the finished product. There was no primer. He was painting with a finished product, and he said he was putting 2 coats on it. And I watched them spray a heavy coat on, and then they rolled it down. They back rolled it down, and he said, "Here's your spray. That's 1 coat, and here's your roll. That's 2 coats." The product was totally wet. That was not, in my mind, 2 coats, but they were trying to pass that off to the architect, and we had a conversation about what made the most sense. Sometimes when we communicate at job sites, there are different variations of how we communicate. There are things that we say that may or may not make sense. That's why it's important to get an experienced contractor on the job or a rep on the job. I'll give you a good example just here. We got a call that said we had soft edges. This is a soft edge. You can see the gypsum that was laid down there, this edge hardness should be somewhere between 18 and 21 on our scale. It was about a 14, and so when they laid the board down, it was actually starting to tear up the paper. You can see a couple little creases there. You can see the fact that the gypsum that was there got all crumbled. It wasn't hard enough. In this particular case down here, this was a super hard edge. This was about a 25 or a 28, and it was actually raked across a windowsill. On site, we had a chance to see it. It was well within, it was actually a little too hard. It was a little more brittle than it could have been. And so they were raking it across the windowsill as it came in from the boom truck. Everywhere else they laid it down. In this one, every single piece almost had damage. In this one, they said there's just sporadic damage. We don't understand why. When we got to the job site, they were stalking another job. We had a chance to see the same crew in action. So understanding what's going on the job, just because, and both of these were reported as soft edges, which that was not the case. One was a manufacturing defect, and that needed to be fixed at the manufacturing level and paid for. This one was an application issue and a stocking issue, and that was a different situation altogether. When we talk about installation issues, the GA 216 talks about not putting gypsum right to the edge. You have to bring it down just a little bit to the half part of the stud. So we have that 3/8 inch minimum that we try to shoot for. And if you have a hard edge or a soft edge and you get too close, you can cause what we call blowout. We can also have screw spin out. In this particular case, there's a couple examples where the screw had been pulled out because it spun out. In this case, the stud was a little offset and it just didn't actually hit anything right there. Ceiling sag is another situation. If we talk about the way framing members and the direction of board, or we have too much insulation, sometimes we'll see ceiling sag. There are several different things that can cause that as well. So a job site visit is important. Abuse and impact. I'll give you a little background. About 15 years ago, the steel industry started to come out with instead of a true 20 gauge stud, they came out with a stud that was a different millage, and it had an opportunity with the way it was crimped or the way it was turned, gave the same structural support up and down, but it didn't have the same amount of steel in it that it normally had traditionally. At the same time, drywall was getting harder because we were creating an abuse and impact resistant product in a way to reduce the overall cost of CMU buildings, maybe for school systems. So you've got one product getting harder and the other product getting softer. And what happened was there were some issues with screws not holding right, they hit the metal and they would start to strip out. They would strip the metal out because it had gone through that hard surface, picked up some extra dust, and went to grab. It wouldn't grab as well. So the Gypsum Association, and this is one of the reasons why we talk about having the most current version, in 2015, it started to come out with saying there should be a thicker stud, a traditional 20 gauge stud, instead of a smaller millage stud, instead of the 19 to 18 to 22 that we were seeing out there, when we use these products to be able to grab the product as well. There's also a different type of screw that could be used. And so there's best practices that are being as the industry changes, as products change, there are best practices that go out and they are updated in these particular products. Another thing sometimes that we see is the product needs to be hung a certain direction. We start with the open flange of the stud and we go to the closed edge so that we make sure things stay even and we don't pull them off to the side. Here's a good example. We got a call on this particular job and they said, you have high shoulders. Now, a high shoulder is something where the taper, the part in the middle of the board, there's a spot where in the middle of the board where it starts to quote unquote taper down, for like it gets thinner in the middle. That's where we lay our tape. If you have a part where there's a ridge there, and if it tends to be too high, then it creates a spot where you have a dip here and then you have a dip over there. They said these were high shoulders, and it actually wasn't. They had hung the board incorrectly, and so it was pulling the one side of the stud into the other. And these are things that we see on a regular basis. We can easily talk to the contractor about it, to the general contractor, to the architect. Control joints are important because gypsum does move microscopically. And so if we get outside 30 feet in a row with a flat spot, you will often see where you should have had a control joint. A control joint is nothing more than a break in the drywall with a small bead or an opening. And in this particular case, this was a Rainbow Daycare Center, a wood frame building that was 96 foot long with a hallway, and they had no control joints. And in this particular case, about 30 feet from one side of the door and 31 feet from the other side of the door, the drywall started to split. The drywall basically was expanding and contracting to the point where it was creating a crack in the drywall. So when I got called to this job, they said, we have cracks everywhere. Well, some of it was control joints. And then right in the middle of this hallway, they had a vaulted ceiling where they had a scissor truss with a skylight above it. And in this particular case, I identified these as control joints. And they said, well, where do we need to put the control joints on here? And I said, that's not a control joint. That's a stress crack. This is completely straight in between two pieces of drywall. You can see this goes very different ways. We went up into the roof and you could see that the scissor truss also had an HVAC unit right beside the skylight, and it wasn't holding up well. That was a structural issue. So two different issues. Just took some time to sit down and talk about it, go through that process. Board ridges in the GA 221-19 talks about centerline cracking and joint ridging. This happens sometimes in cold environments, extremely cold and extremely hot environments. And again, it's one of those areas where we think about environmental conditions. Is the job site prepared correctly to receive drywall? That happens when the ASTM C840 has a whole section on environmental conditions. Another situation we have sometimes, we get talked about. I got called out on both of these particular jobs, and they said we have nail pops. Well, in this particular case, this was a nail pop. Nails sometimes in wood, if the wood it starts to dry or it gets wet and then it starts to move, then it'll start to push the nail out. And this was a nail pop. You can see a couple of them right here. GA 222-19 talks about how you repair those, and the correct way to do that, which is basically to drive these in where they're below the surface. You can coat them again, put another one out about an inch away, and move forward. This one was also called a nail pop, but this was not a nail pop at all. This was shrinkage. And what had happened here, you can see this is like an EIFS or a synthetic stucco coat over some drywall that was applied in the winter with no heat on the job. And so they sealed this side of the board, and there was only one way and the joint compound was still wet. And when it started to dry, there was only one place for the moisture to go, and that was through the back of the wall. And when it did that, it started to take the joint compound as much as it could with it to dry it out, and it shrank. So you can see the outlines of the tape. Here's the crease in the middle of the tape. You can see the outlines of the tape on all around here, and those were the nail spots. That was one of the most extreme areas I've ever seen. Gypsum can be curved if it needs to be, to some extent. Here's a couple examples. different things that you can do. The Gypsum Association has its own document, talk about how you frame them, how you put them together. It's important to have the environmental conditions be correct before you put drywall on the job. Again, ASTM C840 says building must be dried in, temperature must be controlled, 50 degrees, 50% humidity or better. Is your job site prepared? Well, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Here's a good example. And the reason why it's important to bring people out to the job site is sometimes we can propose a solution when things aren't perfect. You know, in this particular case, this was up in Canada. This was a housing development where there was going to be glass along this front. There was drywall hung in all these units, and they had a certain time frame where they had to keep moving to get this project ready, a university project for the students to move in the next fall. They wanted to finish in here, which was absolutely positively not sub-zero temperatures all over the place. Couldn't use regular joint compound, but they agreed that it was so important to move forward that we put together a program where we said, okay, we'll use setting compound, which is a product that you can mix on site. We'll put temporary heat that we blew into these spots as we were working on the units. We put temporary heat in there to dry it out as best we could while the setting compound set. Continued to finish through the job, and they understood that when the windows finally did arrive and they got things closed in, the heat turned on, they would likely have to do some repairs, but they were able to keep the job moving to the point where they could meet their completion time. So again, not the ideal situation, but because they got the reps involved and the manufacturer involved, had an opportunity to suggest something that was way outside the box, and yet it helped them get their project done on time. So I guess through the whole process, one of the things that we find is that sometimes people don't tell us, people don't talk about things until it's too late. So if there's a problem somewhere, communicate, 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 you know, call, if it's a contractor, call the GC. If it's a GC, you know, call the manufacturer, call the owner, call somebody, let somebody know. It goes back to that old adage we talk about. If you see something, say something, you know. Really, we're not mind readers. We're not sitting at the corporate office as a gypsum manufacturer going, I wonder how things are going out there in that Canadian job in the winter. So we think about the duties of quality assurance. You know, from a manufacturing standpoint, it's our job to manufacture products that meet the customer's toughest standards. It's important for the contractor to make sure that these products are properly placed and installed, you know, in the manner in which they're intended to be used. It's important also for job site conditions to be prepared and monitored for gypsum. You know, gypsum is not a product that should be out there when it's pouring down rain or there's 3 feet of snow and you've got it all over the drywall. So I'm going to take a minute now, and I don't know that anybody can. Okay. Looks like, thank you, Lane. I appreciate that. I don't see anything else in the chat. I'm going to continue to move forward here quickly. Just got a couple things to do before we move forward, before we close out today. We're National Gypsum. We're the second largest gypsum manufacturer in the country from a volume standpoint. We have about a 22% market share. Our largest competitor, USG, has a 24% market share. So the two of us together control almost 50% of the volume in the process. We're the two 900-pound gorillas in this space. There's a couple other people that serve the East Coast, Certainty and GP Gypsum. When we get to the West Coast, center and the West Coast, we have American and Pabco are out there as well, for those of you that might be attending from the West Coast. But from a standpoint of all the gypsum manufacturers, you know, have good quality plants and do a nice job with their products. We have 4 particular product lines. We have our Gold Bond building products, which is our drywall products. Permabase is our cement board. Proform is our finishing products, and we have a roof board called Dexel. if you're on the call today and you have not used nationalgypsum.com Design and Resource Center, this is the place that you would go to have an opportunity to find educational sessions, base specifications, guide specs, technical documents. A great place. We're really proud of our website. We've done a really nice job with it. A couple resources you may or may not be aware of. The sound book. This is our second edition. That's why we call it the 2.0. We have 315 different sound tested assemblies in this particular publication. The way it's laid out is steel studs, 16 on center, then 24 on center. We have area separation walls, wood studs, chase walls, roof ceiling assemblies. The way the pages are laid out is when you go to a specific page, there would be 4 pictures that look like this. Again, the picture on the left would be 24 on center. So we've got 20 gauge, 18 gauge, 16 gauge, 25 gauge, different gauges. So we provide a picture. So you can say, okay, I'm looking for a 55 STC. Here's a picture of what I think I see. Here's what I actually see. We list it down below. If there's a UL rating, we will give that to you as well. And then we provide a test number. This is Orfield Labs in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and GC Testing Services in Buffalo, New York. And we also use Riverbank Acoustical Labs, which is an RAL number in Geneva, Illinois, outside Chicago. We will send you that test if you want it. We don't publish it for the competition to see, but we will send you those tests if you need them. The Purple Book 2, again, second edition of this. We hired a young man off the street in 2008, 2009, downturn. He was looking for someplace to go. So he came over to the dark side, the gypsum manufacturers. As an architect, we wanted him to draw. And so he put together pictures like this for us. But at the same time, he said there were certain things I could never find, the details that I would really like to be able to include. And so he put together a thing called the Purple Book. And again, if you got a head of wall detail, static or dynamic, what would it look like? How would you detail that? What are the products that would be used? Is there a head of wall detail? Is there a head of wall test that maybe you could reference to start out to see where it was at? Is there a UL number somewhere for this assembly? Do you want to cantilever off a beam? Same way. How would we do these details? Inline joints, horizontal membranes, shaft walls, all kinds of information in this book. For wood framed, we recently came out with a product that was similar to the Purple Book, only it was wood framed construction. And it has fire rated designs for wood frame walls, floor ceiling, head of wall details. Here's a good example. If you have a wood framed 1 hour assembly and you intrude into it with a floor ceiling assembly, do you still have a 1 hour rating? Well, we've run a test to basically show what you can do to make sure that you have that. From a wood frame perspective, horizontal membrane, from one floor to another. Once you interrupt that membrane, do you still have a fire rating? Well, if you only have one header there, one horizontal tube before, you do not. There's a test that we ran to show that 2 will get you there. So that's the type of information that are in these publications. All 3 of these you can download from our website. And if you're on the call today and you'd like to have hard copies, be happy to give them to you. We're committed to transparency. We've got someone on staff who helps out with that sort of thing. We've got a wide variety of gypsum products. I'm not going to spend the time to go through them. I will just tell you that if you can't find me, you can call 1-800-NATIONAL anytime between 8 o'clock and 4:45 Eastern time, and you will talk to one of these 3 people. Mark Chapman's been there 42 years. He's the godfather of tech. He works on Gypsum Association. He's an engineer, by the way. He works on the Gypsum Association documents committee, as well as works with ASTM and does UL testing in our fire lab. Jimmy Farrell in the middle is a former general contractor. He is one of those people that basically has been on the job site, and if you need some help, he can help you out from there. And then the fellow seated in the front is Sam Haverson. He's the young man I said that is the architect that we have on staff. We have 2 of them on staff. He's the one that created these documents that we talked about earlier. So with that, I'm going to say, is there a way to obtain publications like the GA600 without paying $110, which is what they cost. Good question, Lane. Anyone who's on the call today who would like to have one of those documents, I will be sending out an email with your certificates, or we will be sending you one. Please follow up with me and I'll see if we can get you one. We have some copies, some complimentary copies that we pass out to folks. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate your time. I apologize for the technical issues. I thought I'd have a co-host. As it turns out, I didn't end up getting one. So kind of run this thing blind by myself. So thanks again, folks. We appreciate you being here. Look for our Procrastination Day event. Again, 4 different sessions that will start at 11 o'clock Eastern time and run to about 4 o'clock Eastern time. So run that through your various Mountain Time, West Coast time, wherever you're at. That'll be Friday the 13th. What a great day for an event. And there'll be something posted on our website soon. We've got our sessions finalized and we'll be putting them up soon. Thanks again for being here. We appreciate it.